On March 22nd, Moscow was hit with the largest terrorist attack it has experienced in its modern history. There was an attack, an outright siege of the Crocus concert hall building, where thousands of people had convened for a popular concert by the band Picnic. I'm probably saying all these terms wrong, but I do not speak Russian. So, nonetheless, this was one of the biggest attacks in Russia's modern history. Thousands of people were trapped in an inferno. There have been 11, I believe it is now, people apprehended who have been charged and who have been accused of conducting this attack. And 4 of them were caught fleeing to the Ukrainian border in the Bryansk region. It's a lot of questions, but not yet a lot of answers, because Russia is still conducting its investigation, has just started. And so what we do know, though, and I'll pull up the report, is that this was not just a horrific act of terrorism, not just a deadly one. Here's the RT report. But it is, as it says, 11 people, including 4 directly involved in the massacre, have been detained, says Russia's security service. So not only was this a horrific terrorist attack, but it really was an act of war. And I don't think it is a coincidence that this occurred just a day after Russia declared it was in a state of war. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Russian government, saying that, for the administration, saying that outright. So here's the report. It says a large concert venue near Moscow became the scene of a mass shooting last Friday. The massacre left over 100 people dead, including children, and it's one of the worst terrorist attacks in Russia's modern history. According to the latest estimates, at least 133 people were killed and scores injured in the shooting and subsequent fire, sparked by a group of gunmen who stormed the Crocus City Hall, a large music venue just outside of the Russian capital. So there are details still emerging, and there's going to be, but according to the Russia's Federal Security Services, the FSB, it was a carefully planned attack designed to maximize casualties. An investigation is underway, and here's what we know. We know that 11 people, including 4 of them who were directly involved in the deadly shooting, have been detained, the FSB said in a statement on Saturday. According to the security service, the weapons used in the shooting were organized in a cache in advance. Russia's investigative committee also confirmed that 4 suspects who committed the terrorist attack on Crocus City Hall were detained in Bryansk region, not far from the border with Ukraine. According to the authorities, the terrorists plan to flee to Ukraine. So that's a key point we're going to get into very soon. So according to the investigative committee, Saturday afternoon, the death toll has risen to 133 people. So as of this recording, which is March 23rd, we have 133 people dead, 3 children, and many more bodies are going to be discovered under the rubble. Likely, there have been 121 more people wounded and 107 more requiring hospitalization, and there are still emergency services there. Okay, so we had some interrogation. I'm going to play, Putin did address Russia, and I'm going to play some of that, okay? But there was a terrorist suspect apprehended who said in a video that he went on this spree because he was promised 500,000 rubles or 5,400 US dollars. He claimed his handlers had instructed him where the attack should take place. He was ordered to kill people there. It didn't matter who. And he said that it was organized on Telegram with an unknown person who provided weapons. So that's what we know so far. So it's indiscriminate. There's an estimated capacity of 7,500 people in the City Hall building. The Crocus Concert Hall, City Hall building was almost full that night. They originally attacked and murdered the armed guards and stormed the entrance of the venue, blocked it before continuing their rampage inside. So basically just indiscriminate shooting, and then of course burning the place down. Supposedly it was setting fire. They were setting fire to the chairs, and then they fled. And 4 of them were detained trying to flee in a car to the Ukrainian border. So there were condolences and condemnations Okay, you even had the EU and NATO and the United States all come in solidarity, supposedly. We'll get to why that may be fraudulent with this attack. But much, and I'll tell you why later also, why this should be suspect. But meanwhile, so you also had U.S. security alerts warning on March 8th. That's another key point here. On March 8th, you had the United States Embassy in Russia warning U.S. citizens that such an attack or a similar attack, or maybe this attack, was coming. And so at the moment, though, the United States and the handlers of the Biden administration are all saying they didn't know anything about this. All right. So with all that said, so that's what we know so far. Okay. It's not a lot because this is still an ongoing development and things will continue to change as we move along through the investigative process that Russia will be likely thoroughly conducting because it has every interest. And this is why it's ridiculous for Ukraine. And Zelensky did say this. For Ukraine and Zelensky to implicate that this was Russia's fault or Russia did it. There's absolutely nothing that could be benefited by Russia. There's no benefit for Russia to do such a thing. And it just shows how low, and honestly, Maria Zakharova said it herself. She said, the foreign ministry spokesperson, she said, what did she say? Well, she said that they sound a little guilty in Ukraine. They sound like they're the ones who are projecting their own complicity, likely complicity, on to Russia. So just something to think about. Here we have Vladimir Putin. Okay, I'm going to play a couple minutes of his address to the nation, not the entire address to the nation, but here's how Vladimir Putin responded. He said the suspects from the attacks on Russia were captured attempting to flee to Ukraine, and he says all the orchestrators responsible for this attack will pay. So here is what Vladimir Putin had to say.
They tried to escape. They were moving towards the border with Ukraine. And we have data that suggests that they were about to be moved towards the territory of Ukraine by those in Ukraine. Our military services, our emergency services, our investigators are working on finding out the orchestrators of this terrorist attack, those who gave them transportation, who who gave them weapons, etc. The investigative authorities will do everything to identify all details of this crime, but it's already evident that we face not just a cynically organized terrorist attack, but a mass killing of civilians. These perpetrators, these criminals, went specifically to kill people point blank, our people, our children, just like the Nazis that once killed our people during the war. They do the same. All the orchestrators, all those who are responsible for this crime will inevitably be found responsible. They will pay. We will identify everyone who stands behind these terrorists, and they will pay. This is a strike against Russia. We know what terrorist threat means, and we expect that other nations that share our pain will cooperate with us, and we will stand united against this common enemy, international terrorism, no matter where it shows its ugly head. These terrorists have no nationality, and there's only one future for them: retribution and oblivion.
So there's Vladimir Putin promising oblivion for those who are responsible and emphasizing this point that they were headed, the perpetrators of this attack, or at least those that have been captured related to this attack, were fleeing to Ukraine. And I say this over and over again because now you have an attempt by the Western mainstream media to denigrate. First, we're going to look at what friend of the show, Scott Ritter, had to say about this, to denigrate this accusation, to denigrate this assertion that Ukraine is likely involved. And that's very suspect, given the fact that we already have proof that they were in the Bryansk region. Where is that? That is moving toward the Ukrainian border. You just don't cross borders, especially at this time, without connections in that country. So to say there's no involvement is absolutely ridiculous at this point. But before I get to how the Western mainstream media reacted to try to deny this and put it on ISIS of all forces, now we have ISIS back in the forefront, I believe, as a distractor. Here we have friend of the show, Scott Ritter. This is what he had to say to Sputnik. It's a very good, I'm going to actually fast forward it. It's a very good analysis, and we're going to play a bit of it here. We're going to hear what he had to say, the evidence that he has found, and that we will back up directly after this. I'm going to back it up because he's not just talking here. There is literal evidence of CIA, Ukrainian involvement in these kind of attacks, which means that there is a smoking gun, and we should, even if we can't say they did it exactly, that they should be subject to the investigation. That's what the world should be calling for, really. But here's what Scott Ritter had to say.
Let's talk about that aspect, that the attackers were fleeing towards Ukraine. You know, there has been some talk here in the United States. The U.S. government has indicated that the Islamic State has claimed responsibility for this attack, and the U.S. government gives credence to those claims. But, you know, at the end of the day, people of violence always tends to navigate towards their true north. And what I mean by that is, let's take a special forces team operating behind enemy lines. If they're compromised, they try to go home. They try to escape and evade towards friendly lines. ISIS has loyalty to their perverted version of religion, God. Their true north is to become martyrs, to navigate home to heaven. But that's not what these terrorists did. Their true north was Ukraine, and they were navigating towards Ukraine. And that's all we need to know about this. This was an attack that was linked to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Who is behind this attack, who the masterminds are, the Russian security services will find out. But whoever they are, they reside in Ukraine. Let's parse this out just a little bit more. The CIA has been working with Ukrainian intelligence since 2014 to carry out espionage, to carry out acts of violence against Russia. And since 2022, when the Russians initiated the special military operation, the CIA has been working with Ukrainian intelligence to double down on these acts of espionage and violence. We know that the CIA is behind the recruitment, training, and direction of various anti-Putin Russian extremist groups that are operating under the umbrella of the Ukrainian intelligence services. These forces are carrying out active attacks against Russia as we speak in the area of Belgorod and Kursk. Let me make it clear. The CIA is behind the invasion of Russia by CIA-backed and funded Russian nationalist groups working for Ukrainian intelligence. So for those who would say, well, the CIA would never be behind an act of terrorism in Moscow, why not? The CIA right now is behind an active invasion of Russia. The CIA is behind the targeting of strategic Russian sites, oil depots, refineries throughout Russia. The CIA is behind this, actively assisting the Ukrainians in targeting these facilities. If the CIA is willing to blow up an oil depot or refinery hundreds of kilometers inside Russia, why wouldn't they be behind a terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall? The CIA has for decades now been seeking to undermine Russian democracy, to pervert Russian democracy by buying Russian opposition figures, not to further the interest of the Russian nation, but to undermine the presidency of Vladimir Putin. The CIA was involved in such operations leading up to this very election that just transpired earlier this month. So why wouldn't the CIA be behind a terrorist attack in Moscow? We know that the CIA is actively working with nations on the periphery of Russia, in the Caucasus, in Central Asia, to generate anti-Russian sentiment. We know that the CIA openly brags about seeking to recruit people amongst these populations, these disaffected populations, for the singular purpose of undermining Russia, of sowing chaos in Russia, of bringing down Vladimir Putin. Why wouldn't the CIA be behind a terrorist attack in Moscow?
I mean, these are all great questions. But what Scott is saying here is very important, talking about all the ways in which the CIA is actually involved in this larger campaign of containment against Russia, to the point where we have to ask, what was their involvement? What was Ukraine's involvement, given that they were escaping? A good number of these perpetrators were escaping to Ukraine. And I just want to pull up, we don't have to go too far, because the mainstream media has now admitted this. Here's Business Insider. Okay, a decades-long secret partnership between the CIA and Ukraine has been critical in lethal operations against Russia, says the New York Times. So this was a New York Times report that actually talked about the CIA's involvement. It says 10 years ago, and what was 10 years ago? That was just after the coup in Ukraine, but we know the CIA was also involved in that as well in 2014. It says the CIA cautiously partnered with Ukraine to help gather intelligence on Russia. The agency made clear initially it would not help Ukraine conduct lethal operations, but those boundaries have since been removed because of the so-called Russian invasion, aka the Special Military Operation 2022. So those have been removed, meaning that the CIA is directly involved in quote-unquote lethal operations. What does that mean? It means people get killed in these operations. So, and there have been deaths inside of Russia of Mr. Tatarsky, the journalist in St. Petersburg, to Daria Dugina, who was also killed in Russia by a car bomb. I mean, people have been killed because of these attacks already. So this isn't necessarily new. So it says Ukraine has relied on a decade-long secret partnership with the CIA to gather critical intelligence and more recently carry out lethal operations during the war, says the New York Times. The partnership, which can be traced back to February 2014, has provided Ukraine with intelligence gathering training, communications equipment, and in the past 8 years, a network of spy bases built along the Russian border. A CIA spokesperson did not immediately respond for the comment on the report. The partnership began during a crisis for Ukraine when the country's pro-Russian president, as they say, Viktor Yanukovych, had just been ousted and Russia would soon take in Crimea. According to the Times report, the Ukraine Security Service head Valentin Navalchenko first sought the assistance of the CIA and Britain's MI6 to rebuild the country's intelligence agency on February 24, 2014, exactly 8 years before Russia's so-called invasion or special military operation in Ukraine. That's how it all started, she told the Times. Or he told the Times. After realizing that Ukraine's intelligence agency could be an asset to the U.S., the CIA agreed to support Ukraine, which initially came in the form of communication supply and training. But the spy agency also had misgivings about the partnership, partly because it did not want to cross a boundary that would provoke Russia. The CIA made clear it would not help Ukraine carry out operations against its adversary that were lethal. We made a distinction between intelligence collection operations and things that go boom. And those boundaries have since been abandoned, according to the report, since Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, with the Biden administration greenlighting the CIA to provide intelligence critical to Ukraine's lethal operations against Russia. Are they pulling triggers? They say no. said a senior U.S. official on the CIA's role. But are they helping with the targeting? Absolutely. So now, of course, you can quibble. We can quibble with the language. Are they doing it, or are they simply assisting others in doing it? This is what the CIA has always been about. I mean, the CIA has this long history. The dirty wars in Central America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador. It has a long history in Syria, arming rebel groups, some of them who are fighting Pentagon-armed rebel groups, as reports noted in 2016. I believe that was the Washington Post. So the CIA has a long history, and I can't simply name all of the interventions because we would be here for a long time. The Central Intelligence Agency has armed, funded, sponsored coups and insurgencies, dozens upon dozens upon dozens, more than 50 in the last 50 years. So who's to say that the Central Intelligence Agency isn't involved? And it would be absolutely ridiculous to claim that Ukraine is not involved in this. So all of this is going to come to a head. We are going to find out exactly who was involved, exactly how this attack transpired. But make no mistake about it. This terrorist attack is not just simply a terrorist attack. It's not simply just a human tragedy of epic proportions, because it is. It's much more than that. It is the biggest attack on Russian soil in modern history. An attack that was meant to kill in large number, in mass, Russians. And we already know that the United States and NATO have a broader agenda to rain chaos on to Russia, to destabilize it, to weaken it, and ultimately to destroy it. And that necessarily means war. And that is something that the United States and NATO have, of course, especially in the last few months, have not been shy about revealing. If the words of the just Babelbrook mouth, mealy-mouthed Emmanuel Macron have anything of importance to say, or anything of importance and relevance to all of this. And of course, we know that the German Air Force has been found to be implicated in planning, not just giving Taurus missiles to Ukraine, but planning to help them use them on Russian territory. So this has gotten really serious. This comes just a week or so after Russian intelligence was saying that France indeed was preparing thousands of troops for a potential invasion of Russia. NATO has been taking it there. The Central Intelligence Agency is no stranger to war and destabilization, and Ukrainian forces have been conducting acts of terror on Russian soil throughout this special military operation. I mentioned the Dario Dugina death. I mentioned the Joshua, I believe his name was Joshua Tatarsky, his murder, and Dugina's murder. But, you know, there are even, you know, just more examples than this than can be named here. This is a serious problem. This is not just an act of terrorism. This is an act of war that likely implicates the Central Intelligence Agency and Ukraine. And we're going to find out a lot more as the days and weeks transpire through this investigation. So there will be more to come. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.